For most of our 12-year marriage, I thought Rachel and I had something special, a relationship built on trust, mutual respect, and years of shared dreams. We met in college, back when life was simple and full of possibilities. She was a bright, creative graphic design major with a laugh that could light up a room. I was a driven, ambitious business student who had no idea how much I needed someone like her in my life. We fell in love over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza dates, bonding over dreams of success and a future we couldn't wait to build together. Rachel was there for every milestone. My first big internship, my first full-time job, and eventually my promotion to CEO of a mid-sized tech company. She celebrated every win like it was her own, and in many ways I couldn't have done it without her support. But about a year ago, something changed. At first, I thought it was her new job. Rachel had recently started working as a project manager at a prestigious design firm, and it seemed like a perfect fit. She'd been thrilled when she got the offer, and I'd been equally excited for her. It felt like a new chapter for both of us. But as the weeks turned into months, her enthusiasm for the job started to wane. Or maybe it was just her enthusiasm for me. The late night started almost immediately. Deadlines, she'd explain, brushing off my concerns with a quick kiss on the cheek. It's just part of the job. At first, I didn't question it. I'd had my fair share of late nights in the office, and I knew how demanding work could be. But the excuses piled up. Last-minute meetings, urgent client calls, even overnight stays at the office when a project just couldn't wait. When she was home, it felt like she wasn't really there. Rachel had always been the type to curl up next to me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched movies or talked about our day. Now, she barely looked at me. Her phone seemed glued to her hand, and every time I asked her what she was doing, she'd say she was just checking emails. I tried to ignore the growing unease, but it gnawed at me. One evening, as we sat in the living room, me with a glass of scotch, Rachel with her laptop, I decided to confront her. "Is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She didn't look up. "Yeah, why?" "You've just seemed different lately," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I know work's been stressful, but I feel like we haven't really connected in a while." Rachel finally closed her laptop and sighed, her expression one of mild annoyance. "I'm just tired, okay? It's nothing to worry about." Her response should have reassured me, but it didn't. There was a flatness to her tone that felt unfamiliar, almost mechanical. Rachel had always been open with me, unafraid to share her thoughts and feelings. Now, it was like she was hiding behind a mask. The turning point came a few weeks later. Rachel had mentioned she'd be working late again, so I decided to surprise her. I ordered takeout from her favorite Thai place, packed it up in the car, and drove to her office, hoping to brighten her evening. But when I arrived, the building was dark. I called her confused. "Hey, where are you?" "I'm outside your office." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, I'm at a client's site," she said, her voice wavering slightly. It was a last-minute thing. The explanation sounded plausible enough, but something about her tone didn't sit right. Rachel was many things, but she wasn't a good liar. I let it go that night, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I started paying closer attention, watching for the little things I'd overlooked before. The way she angled her phone screen away from me. The text she always seemed to be typing when she thought I wasn't looking. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne on her clothes. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Rachel had always been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. And now, it felt like she was slipping away, disappearing into a world I wasn't part of. Little did I know, that world wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was hiding a betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Friday nights had always been sacred for Rachel and me, a small ritual where we'd wind down after a long week. We'd order takeout, binge watch a show, or just sit and talk. But in the past few months, those evenings had become increasingly rare. This particular Friday, Rachel told me she'd be working late again. "Another deadline?" I asked as she slipped on her heels. "Yeah," she said with a sigh, her hand brushing over the strap of her bag. "This client is a nightmare, but I'll try not to be too late." I'd grown used to these excuses, but something about the way she avoided my eyes this time made me pause. Still, I didn't push. Instead, I decided to do something thoughtful. After finishing my own work for the day, I ordered her favorite Thai takeout and packed it into the car. The drive to her office was quick, and I was excited at the thought of surprising her. I imagined her smile when I walked through the door, her expression softening as she realized I'd gone out of my way to brighten her evening. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed something strange. The building was dark. Not just Rachel's floor, but the entire office complex. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of cars that looked like they'd been sitting there for days. Confused, I dialed her number. "Hey," I said when she picked up. "Where are you?" "I'm outside your office." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that felt a second too long. "Oh, I'm at a client's site," she said, her voice hesitant. "It was a last-minute thing. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't want to interrupt your evening." Her explanation sounded plausible, but her tone didn't. Rachel was usually so confident, so sure of herself. The hesitation in her voice felt foreign, like someone trying to improvise a story they hadn't prepared for. "Okay," I said slowly. "Well, I brought dinner for you. Should I drop it off somewhere?" "No, that's sweet, but don't worry about it," she said quickly. "I've already eaten." "Thanks, though. I'll see you at home." I hung up, the bag of food sitting untouched in the passenger seat. The drive back home was quiet, my mind spinning with questions. Why hadn't she mentioned the client earlier? And why did her voice sound like she was hiding something? Later that night, Rachel came home looking perfectly composed. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for thinking of her, and disappeared into the shower before I could press her further. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself I was being paranoid. But when I walked into the kitchen to grab some water, I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. Rachel was a private person, and I respected her boundaries. But something about the night had put me on edge. I glanced at the screen, and my heart stopped. The message was from someone named Jay. It read, "Had a great time tonight. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. I stared at the phone, willing the notification to vanish, as though that would erase what I'd just seen. When Rachel came back into the room a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, I quickly turned away and busied myself with cleaning the counter. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone casual. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She didn't push, and neither did I. But that night, as I lay in bed next to her, my mind raced. Who was Jay? And what exactly had Rachel done that evening? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I hated the thought of snooping. It felt invasive, like a betrayal of the trust we'd built over the years. But then again, hadn't she already betrayed me? While Rachel was in the shower, I opened her phone. She'd always been careless with her passcode, and I knew it by heart. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, searching for the thread with Jay. What I found shattered me. The texts were flirtatious, playful, and filled with inside jokes that made it clear this wasn't a casual acquaintance. "I can't stop thinking about you," one message read. "Last night was amazing." Another said, "When can we meet again?" I quickly snapped screenshots and sent them to my own email before locking her phone and putting it back on the counter. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't catch my breath. Rachel emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, toweling her hair dry. She smiled at me, oblivious to the storm raging inside my head. "I was thinking we could go out for dinner tonight," she said, her voice light and cheerful. "Sure," I said, my voice hollow. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. The Rachel I thought I knew was gone. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Rachel and I still shared the same house, the same bed, but everything felt hollow. The knowledge of her late-night messages with Jay ate away at me, and I couldn't unsee the words that hinted at something much deeper than friendship. Yet I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I started to do what I never thought I'd have to. I became a detective in my own life. The first thing I did was check Rachel's social media. She wasn't one to overshare, so I didn't expect to find much, and I was right. Her posts were sparse, mostly work-related or generic pictures of sunsets and coffee cups. There were no obvious red flags, no incriminating comments or tags. On the surface, she was the same Rachel everyone thought they knew. But behind closed doors, there was something darker brewing. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I decided to look at her phone again. I hated myself for it. Invading her privacy felt wrong, but the trust in our marriage had already been shattered, and I needed answers. This time, I didn't just skim her texts. I went deeper. I opened the thread with Jay and scrolled through weeks of messages. They ranged from light and playful to deeply personal, and the story they told was clear. Rachel was having an affair. "I can't stop thinking about you," one message read. "You make me feel alive," another said. And then the one that hit me like a sledgehammer. "I wish I could spend the night with you instead of going home." My hands trembled as I read through the texts, each one feeling like a fresh wound. The more I scrolled, the more pieces of the puzzle came together. Jay wasn't just some casual fling. He was Jacob, one of Rachel's coworkers. She had mentioned him in passing before, a project manager with a reputation for charm. I remembered thinking nothing of it at the time. Now it felt like the walls were closing in. But it wasn't just the texts. As I continued digging, I found something even worse, an email draft in her account. It was addressed to a lawyer, detailing plans to serve me with divorce papers. My heart stopped as I read the subject line, preparation for filing, clean break. The email was methodical and cold, outlining her intentions like a business plan. She wanted a clean break, citing irreconcilable differences and proposing a division of assets that included her keeping the house. She even mentioned wanting to avoid a fight to maintain appearances. The kicker? She planned to serve me the papers on my birthday. I read the email over and over, the words blurring together as the reality sank in. Rachel wasn't just cheating on me. She was plotting to humiliate me, to blindside me with a calculated betrayal. My mind raced with questions. How long had she been planning this? How much of our life together had been a lie? I closed her phone and put it back on the nightstand, my chest heaving as I tried to breathe through the rising tide of anger and pain. Lying next to me, Rachel slept peacefully, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. The next morning, I went through the motions as if nothing had changed. I kissed Rachel on the cheek as she left for work, but the sight of her felt unbearable. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I knew I had to bide my time. Over the next few days, I kept gathering evidence. Screenshots of the texts, copies of the email drafts. I even started tracking her movements subtly, noting the times she claimed to be at work versus when her location didn't match up. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, not just at Rachel, but at myself. How had I been so blind? How had I let this happen right under my nose? But beneath the anger was something else, determination. Rachel thought she could control the narrative, that she could blindside me with her carefully laid plans. She thought I'd roll over and accept her betrayal. She had no idea what was coming. The days after discovering Rachel's plan were a blur of emotions. Rage, disbelief, heartbreak. But one feeling rose above all the others, determination. She thought she could humiliate me, destroy everything we had built together, and walk away unscathed. She thought I'd crumble blind and blindsided. But she underestimated me. Rachel wanted drama? I'd give her drama, but it would be on my terms, not hers. The first step was gathering evidence. Every late-night text, every flirtatious message, every damning detail of her affair with Jacob. It was all there. I combed through her phone again when she wasn't home, screenshotting anything that could paint the full picture of her betrayal. There were photos of them together at work events I hadn't been invited to, emails coordinating their work dinners, and even a calendar entry for a weekend trip labeled Team Retreat, a retreat I was certain had nothing to do with her team. I also revisited the email draft to her lawyer, taking careful note of the division of assets she had proposed. Her audacity was staggering. She wanted the house, a generous chunk of our savings, and to be free of conflict to keep her professional image intact. I couldn't believe the gall of someone who was actively betraying me while plotting to strip me of everything I'd worked for. Next, I contacted my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense professional named Victoria. I walked in her office with a folder full of evidence and laid it all out on the table. She's planning to serve me divorce papers on my birthday, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I want to beat her to it. Victoria flipped through the evidence, her expression unreadable. Well, this is thorough, she said finally. We can definitely use this. She paused, glancing up at me. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? It's going to make a statement, but it might get messy. That's the point, I said. She's been plotting behind my back for God knows how long. I'm not just going to sit here and let her make me the villain in her story. I want to flip the script. Victoria nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. All right then, let's make sure this is airtight. We spent the next few days drafting divorce papers and preparing for what Victoria called a preemptive strike. Unlike Rachel's plan, mine wasn't going to rely on lies or manipulation. It was going to rely on the truth. And the truth was damning enough. As the day of my office's pre-birthday party approached, I played the part of the oblivious husband. Rachel was in high spirits, throwing herself into planning the event as if nothing was wrong. She even made a show of asking about my co-workers' preferences, choosing decorations, and ordering a cake with my name scrawled across it in elegant frosting. Are you excited for the party? She asked one evening, curling up beside me on the couch. Of course, I said, keeping my voice steady. You've really outdone yourself. She smiled, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. The morning of the party, I left for work as usual, carrying the folder of evidence in my briefcase and the signed divorce papers Victoria had prepared. My colleagues were in high spirits, congratulating me on my upcoming birthday and chatting about the celebration plan for later that afternoon. Rachel arrived at the office an hour before the party started, her face glowing with confidence. She dressed to impress, wearing a sleek black dress that turned heads as she walked through the building. She introduced Jacob to a few of my colleagues, calling him a close friend and thanking him for helping with some last-minute party details. I watched from across the room, my blood boiling, but my expression calm. Let her enjoy this moment, I thought. She won't see what's coming next. As the party reached its peak, with drinks flowing and laughter filling the air, I decided it was time to make my move. I tapped a glass with a fork to get everyone's attention, and the room quieted. Rachel stood near the center of the crowd, her arm casually brushing against Jacob's, oblivious to the trap about to spring. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to celebrate with me today." I paused, letting the anticipation build. Since we're all gathered here, there's something I need to address. Something important. Rachel's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't seem alarmed. "Over the past year," I continued, "I've faced some challenges, personally and professionally. And while I thought I had a partner by my side to help me through them, I recently discovered that wasn't the case." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rachel's expression shifted from confusion to unease as she glanced around, trying to gauge the reaction of the room. "Rachel," I said, turning to face her directly, "I know about your affair with Jacob." Gasps echoed through the room. Rachel's face drained of color, and Jacob froze, his drink still in his hand. "But that's not all," I said, pulling the folder of evidence from my briefcase. "I also know about your plans to divorce me. Plans you were kind enough to draft in an email to your lawyer." I handed the folder to Victoria, who had discreetly joined the party earlier. She began distributing copies of the evidence to my colleagues, ensuring there was no room for denial. And because I believe in being proactive, I added, pulling out another set of papers, "I've taken the liberty of preparing divorce papers of my own." I walked over to Rachel and placed them in her trembling hands. The room was silent, save for the sound of Rachel's sharp breaths. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "I'm not humiliating you," I said, my voice calm. "I'm simply holding you accountable." As I turned and walked away, the weight that had been pressing on me for weeks finally began to lift. Rachel's plan had crumbled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own story. The party had the kind of energy you'd expect for a celebratory office gathering. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, and upbeat music playing softly in the background. It was surreal to stand there, smiling and making polite conversation, knowing what was about to unfold. My colleagues had no idea that this event, meant to honor my birthday, would soon turn into something far more dramatic. Rachel arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that was impossible to ignore. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair styled perfectly, and carried an air of confidence as if she were the guest of honor. I watched as she worked the room, greeting my co-workers warmly and effortlessly inserting herself into conversations. Then there was Jacob. He trailed behind her, smiling sheepishly as she introduced him to a few people. "This is Jacob, a close friend of mine from work," she said, her voice dripping with charm. I clenched my jaw as I saw her arm brush against his, a gesture that felt far too familiar for just a friend. The timing had to be perfect. I needed the room full, the attention focused, and Rachel comfortably oblivious. As the event hit its stride, with champagne glasses refilled and the sound of laughter echoing through the space, I made my move. I walked to the front of the room, tapping my glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. The chatter quieted, and dozens of eyes turned toward me. Rachel stood near the back of the crowd, her hand lightly resting on Jacob's arm. She smiled at me, probably assuming I was about to thank her for organizing the party. "First, I want to thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It means a lot to celebrate this milestone with so many amazing colleagues and friends." Rachel's smile widened, but her expression shifted slightly as I continued. "Since we're all gathered," I said, pausing for effect, "there's something I'd like to share. Something personal." I turned to face Rachel directly, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Rachel," I said, my voice sharp and unyielding, "I know about your affair with Jacob." The air was sucked out of the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and all eyes darted to Rachel and Jacob. Rachel's face went pale, her confident demeanor evaporating in an instant. Jacob froze, his drink halfway to his lips, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I've spent the last few weeks uncovering the truth, I continued, pulling a folder from the table next to me. This folder contains evidence, texts, emails, photos, all proving the relationship you've been hiding. I handed the folder to my lawyer, Victoria, who had been discreetly mingling among the guests. She stepped forward and began distributing copies to key individuals in the room, ensuring there was no room for doubt. Rachel tried to speak, her voice trembling. This isn't the time or place. Oh, I disagree. I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. You plan to serve me with divorce papers on my birthday. You were going to blindside me in front of everyone we know. So I thought it was only fair to return the favor. The room was silent, save for the sound of shuffling papers and a few whispered exclamations. But that's not all, I continued. I also want to make an announcement regarding Jacob. As CEO of this company, I take workplace conduct very seriously. Jacob, your actions violate our policies on professional relationships. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. The collective gasp was almost deafening. Jacob opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He looked to Rachel for support, but she was too busy trying to keep herself together. Let this serve as a reminder, I said, addressing the room, that integrity matters, both personally and professionally. I turned back to Rachel, who now looked like she was about to crumble. I pulled out another set of papers, the divorce documents Victoria and I had prepared. And since we're dealing with integrity, I said, handing the papers to Rachel, these are for you. Effective immediately. Rachel stared at the papers, her hands trembling. The confident, polished woman who had walked into the room just minutes ago was gone. In her place was someone who finally realized the full weight of her actions. As I stepped away from the front of the room, my colleagues erupted into hushed murmurs. I could feel their eyes on me, their shock palpable. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control, a sense of justice. Rachel and Jacob had tried to humiliate me, to destroy my life without a second thought. The silence in the room was deafening. Rachel, usually so composed and confident, stood frozen, her face pale as though all the blood had drained from it. Jacob, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to meld into the floor. His drink hovered awkwardly in midair, forgotten as he stared at me, his mouth slightly open but unable to form a single word. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by the faint sound of papers rustling as Victoria, my lawyer, began distributing copies of the evidence I'd compiled. Each recipient reacted differently, some with wide-eyed disbelief, others with poorly concealed expressions of shock or outrage. Here's proof of their relationship, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I gestured to Victoria, who held up the folder for emphasis. Every text, email, and photo tells the story they didn't want me, or anyone else, to know. I paused, turning to Rachel, whose expression had shifted to something between fury and desperation. And here, I continued, holding up a separate set of papers, are the divorce documents I prepared for Rachel. Effective immediately, Rachel finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and uneven. This is ridiculous, she said, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for someone to come to her defense. You're making a scene over nothing. Nothing? I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. I think the people in this room can judge for themselves whether it's nothing. Victoria, ever the professional, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this moment to address another matter, she said, her tone crisp and authoritative. As you are all aware, the company has strict policies regarding workplace conduct. Given the evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Jacob and Rachel, we have determined that Jacob's continued employment is untenable. All eyes turned to Jacob, who looked like he was ready to faint. Effective immediately, Victoria concluded, Jacob's contract with the company is terminated. Jacob finally broke his silence. You can't do this, he spluttered, his voice cracking. You're making a mistake. This has nothing to do with work. Victoria remained calm, her response swift and unwavering. You are in violation of multiple workplace policies, including conduct unbecoming of a professional environment. This decision is final. Rachel stepped forward, her voice rising in pitch. This isn't fair, she cried, her tone bordering on hysteria. You're humiliating us in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? I stared at her, my face devoid of sympathy. You didn't seem too concerned about my reputation when you were sneaking around with Jacob, I said evenly. So forgive me if I'm not particularly interested in yours. The room remained silent as Rachel's words faltered, replaced by a stunned expression. For a moment, it seemed as though she might try to defend herself further, but she must have realized there was no point. The evidence spoke for itself. As I turned back to the crowd, I saw a mix of emotions in their faces. Shock, pity, admiration. Whatever they were feeling, it was clear that Rachel and Jacob had burned every bridge in that room. "Let this be a reminder," I said, my voice calm but firm, "that integrity matters, both personally and professionally. Betrayal has consequences." With that, I stepped away from the front of the room, leaving Rachel and Jacob to face the fallout of their actions. Victoria followed me, her expression unreadable but professional. Behind us, murmurs and whispers filled the room, the shock of the revelation still sinking in. As I exited the event space, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks began to lift. The betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, they were still there, but I'd taken back control. Rachel and Jacob thought they could manipulate me, blindside me, and destroy the life I'd worked so hard to build. But in the end, the only lives they had destroyed were their own. The fallout from that night was as swift as it was brutal. News of Rachel and Jacob's affair spread like wildfire through both professional and personal circles. It started in my office, where whispers and side conversations filled the halls the very next day. People who had once admired Rachel for her charm and poise now avoided even mentioning her name. Jacob, of course, had it worse. Being terminated for violating workplace conduct policies was no small blow to his career. The tech industry was tight-knit, and word of his unceremonious firing traveled quickly. By the end of the week, he'd lost not only his job, but several professional connections that had taken years to build. Rachel's reputation took its own hit. Though she wasn't directly tied to my company, her connection to Jacob and the very public nature of their exposure meant that her colleagues and acquaintances soon learned about her betrayal. She withdrew from social media, stopped attending events, and from what I heard, started looking for a new job far from our city. In the weeks that followed, Rachel tried to salvage what little control she had left. At first, she sent me tearful voicemails, her tone laced with desperation. "Please, we need to talk," she said in one message, her voice trembling. "You've made your point, but you can't just throw away everything we had. We can fix this." When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. The next message was laced with anger. "You're ruining my life," she snapped. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you even realize what you've done?" The irony of her accusations wasn't lost on me. Rachel had been perfectly willing to destroy my life for her own gain. But now that the tables had turned, she couldn't handle the consequences. Her emails were even more elaborate. Pages of rationalizations and half-apologies mixed with attempts to rewrite the narrative. "I never meant for things to get so out of hand," one email read. "But you have to understand, I felt like we were drifting apart, and Jacob was just a distraction. It didn't mean anything." I didn't respond. There was no point. The damage had been done, and her words were nothing more than an attempt to shift blame and absolve herself. Blocking her number was the final step in cutting her out of my life. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd spent over a decade building a life with Rachel, and part of me still clung to the memories of who I thought she was. But I knew I couldn't move forward with her voice constantly in my ear, reminding me of the betrayal. Therapy became a lifeline during that time. At first, I was skeptical, unsure of how talking to a stranger could possibly help. But my therapist, a calm and empathetic woman named Dr. Whitman, helped me unpack the layers of pain and betrayal I'd been carrying. "It's not just about what she did," Dr. Whitman said during one session. "It's about how it's made you question everything. Your judgment, your self-worth, even your ability to trust." She was right. Rachel's actions had left me feeling unmoored, as though the foundation of my life had crumbled beneath me. But slowly, through therapy and introspection, I began to rebuild. I started focusing on the things I could control: my career, my health, my relationships with friends and family. I reconnected with hobbies I'd neglected, spending weekends hiking or painting in the spare room that had once been Rachel's office. Each small step felt like a victory, a reminder that I could move forward without her. The fallout from Rachel and Jacob's actions was far-reaching, but in the end, it wasn't just about them. It was about me, finding the strength to reclaim my life and move forward on my own terms. The months after the fallout were a period of rediscovery. For years, I defined myself as part of a partnership, pouring my energy into building a life with Rachel. But now, for the first time in over a decade, I was forced to look inward. At first, it was overwhelming, like staring at a blank canvas without knowing where to start. But slowly, I began to see the opportunity hidden within the wreckage. One of the first things I did was reconnect with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years I'd been absorbed in my marriage and career. I reached out to Mark, my college roommate, who immediately insisted on catching up over beers. "Man, I haven't seen you in forever," he said as we clinked glasses at a local pub. "I was starting to think you'd gone full hermit." I laughed, the sound feeling lighter than it had in weeks. "I think I did for a while," I admitted, "but I'm trying to change that." Mark grinned. "Well, it's about time. Let's get you out of that cave of yours." Reconnecting with people wasn't just a distraction. It was a reminder of who I was before my world had been consumed by Rachel's betrayal. I started saying yes to invitations I might have ignored before. Game nights, trivia competitions, casual dinners with coworkers. Each interaction felt like another step toward reclaiming my identity. I also rediscovered hobbies that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. Painting, once a passion of mine, became a form of therapy. I turned the spare room, what had once been Rachel's office, into a makeshift studio, filling it with canvases, brushes, and tubes of vibrant paint. At first, the strokes were hesitant, as though I wasn't sure if I still had the skill or creativity. But as the days passed, the movements became more fluid, the colors bolder. Painting gave me a sense of control, a way to express emotions I couldn't always put into words. Hiking was another escape. I joined a local group, and every weekend, we'd explore trails that wound through forests, over hills, and along serene lakesides. The physical challenge, combined with the beauty of the outdoors, gave me a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The house, once a shared space filled with memories of Rachel, became a project of its own. It had been hard at first, walking into rooms that seemed haunted by her presence. The couch where we'd binge-watch shows, the dining table where we'd shared countless meals. It all felt like a monument to what I'd lost. But instead of wallowing in the past, I decided to make the house my own. I started small, replacing throw pillows and curtains, then moved on to bigger projects. The dining room got a fresh coat of paint in a deep, warm blue. The bedroom, once a neutral, sterile space, was transformed with bold artwork and soft, inviting textures. I even splurged on a new sofa, one that didn't remind me of Rachel's impeccable but impersonal taste. It was cathartic, building a space that felt uniquely mine, a reflection of the person I was becoming. As the house evolved, so did my sense of independence. Each change, no matter how small, felt like a victory, a step away from the shadows of the past and toward a future that was entirely my own. Rebuilding wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and sadness. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. This was my life, my space, my journey, and I was determined to make it something worth celebrating. As I moved forward, the remnants of Rachel's life began to unravel. Through mutual acquaintances and the occasional overheard tidbit, I learned that things hadn't gone well for her after the exposure. She and Jacob broke up within weeks of the party. Predictable, given how their relationship had been built on lies and secrecy. Jacob's firing had left him scrambling for work, and Rachel's tarnished reputation followed her wherever she went. She ended up moving in with a relative, a distant cousin who had always been more sympathetic to her than most. From what I heard, she was struggling to find her footing, bouncing between freelance gigs and interviews. Her polished, confident exterior had given way to something more fragile, more desperate. There was a part of me that felt pity for her. I wasn't a monster. Seeing someone I'd once loved fall so far wasn't easy, no matter how much pain she caused. But that pity was fleeting, overshadowed by the scars she'd left behind. Rachel had plotted to betray me in the most public and humiliating way possible. Her dissent, as harsh as it seemed, was a consequence of her own actions. The final contact from Rachel came in the form of an email delivered to my inbox on a quiet Wednesday evening. The subject line read, "An apology." I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the mouse. Part of me wanted to delete it without a second thought, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was long, rambling, and filled with half-hearted attempts at accountability. "I never meant to hurt you the way I did," she wrote. "When things started with Jacob, I was lost and confused. It wasn't about you. It was about me, about trying to feel something I thought I'd lost." She went on to apologize for the betrayal, though her words felt hollow, like she was checking off a box rather than genuinely atoning. Toward the end, she asked for something that caught me off guard: closure. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she wrote, "but I'd like to talk, just once. I think it would help both of us move on." I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangle of anger, sadness, and something close to indifference. For years, Rachel had controlled the narrative, manipulating events to suit her needs. Now, she was asking me to meet her on her terms, to grant her the peace of mind she'd never afforded me. I didn't respond. Some doors are better left closed. Hitting delete felt like the final step in severing the ties that had bound me to Rachel. I didn't need her apology, her explanations, or her attempts at closure. My healing didn't depend on her, and engaging with her again would only reopen wounds I'd worked so hard to heal. Rachel's dissent was her own burden to bear, just as my recovery was mine. While part of me would always wonder what might have been if things had been different, I knew better than to dwell on those thoughts. The past was behind me, and I wasn't going to let it define my future. For the first time, I felt truly free. Rachel's voice, once so omnipresent in my life, had finally been silenced. And in that silence, I found peace. Life after Rachel was both terrifying and liberating. For so long, my identity had been tied to being her husband, her partner, her confidant. When that was taken away, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a vast, unfamiliar terrain, unsure of where to go or how to start. But as the months passed, that uncertainty transformed into possibility. The betrayal still stings, and there are days when the memories creep back uninvited. I sometimes catch myself wondering how things might have been different. What if Rachel had been honest? What if we'd faced our struggles together, instead of letting them grow into the chasm that ultimately consumed us? But those thoughts are fleeting. I've come to see the betrayal not as an ending, but as a catalyst, a painful, necessary step that forced me to reevaluate my life and make changes I might never have considered otherwise. The past is a place I don't need to revisit. It taught me what I needed to learn, and I've left it behind. Now I'm focused on myself, rediscovering who I am outside of the roles I played in my marriage. My career has been a constant source of stability, but it's no longer the only thing that defines me. I've thrown myself into the hobbies I love: painting, hiking, and even taking up guitar lessons, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. The house, once a painful reminder of what I'd lost, now feels like a true home. It's filled with pieces of me, vibrant paintings on the walls, the earthy scent of fresh plants, and Daisy, the rescue dog I adopted to keep me company. She's a scrappy little terrier mix with endless energy, and she's quickly become the heart of my home. Reconnecting with friends has also brought unexpected joy. I've rekindled old friendships and even made a few new ones, surrounding myself with people who genuinely care about me. Their support has been a lifeline, reminding me that I'm not alone on this journey. For the first time in years, I feel free. Free from the weight of betrayal, from the expectations that came with being Rachel's husband, and from the fear of what the future might hold. This chapter of my life is about rebuilding, but it's also about discovery. I've learned to embrace the unknown, to see it not as a void to be feared, but as a canvas waiting to be filled. The scars Rachel left behind will always be part of my story, but they don't define me. They're reminders of my resilience, of the strength it took to stand up for myself and reclaim my life. Every day, I wake up with a renewed sense of purpose. The pain of the past lingers, but it's no longer a burden. It's a testament to how far I've come. This is my new chapter, and for the first time, it feels like a story worth telling.